morning. You are watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Isaac Kwagala, your host. Today, we reflect on the important role of Parliament in the promotion of the Constitution and the protection of human rights for the year ending 2024. I am now joined by a panel of distinguished personalities whom I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce to you, our esteemed viewers. Let me start from my immediate left. Is a regular on the platform, Professor Mwambusa Devesa, who is a distinguished academic and a renowned political commentator. Professor, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, and good morning to the viewers and listeners out there, and I'm glad to be here to share with you issues of state in nation building.
It's a pleasure, Prof.
Thank you.
Next to Professor is the glamorously dressed Charity Ahimbisiwe, the Executive Director for the Electoral Laws and Governance Institute. Charity, it's a pleasure to have you back. Say hello to the viewers.
A very good morning to all our viewers. A good morning to my fellow panelists, and happy to be here with this team.
Many thanks indeed. And of course, next to Charity is also a common face on the platform, Mr. Timothy Chemonges, the Executive Director for the Parliament Watch and the Center for Policy Analysis. Doug, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, Isaac. It's glad to be here and to join colleagues for this discussion. I look forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed. And last but not least is Dr. Tolit Atia, the Associate Director of the Center for Constitutional Governance. Doctor, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, and always intrigued to have discussions for the mwananchi in public space.
Many thanks indeed. They are eagerly waiting to listen to your submission. For context, our viewers, the Parliament is a creation of the Constitution, and therefore it follows that it should be subject to the dictates of the Constitution. Today, we review and assess the performance of this institution in the protection of the Constitution and the promotion of human rights in the country. I am going to start with Charity Ahimbisiwe, who is an expert in the governance space, to help us have a baseline understanding of this topic. Charity, Uganda's human rights record is deteriorating by the day. Since the wake of the 2021 general elections, we have unresolved cases of political prisoners. Some of them have been released, but there are concerns that they were, pressured to admit to those offenses, and then they negotiated for their freedom from the state. But the question I want to ask is, from your perspective as an observer of our governance space, what is your assessment of the Parliament's performance in the protection of human rights and the promotion of the Constitution for this year ending?
So, the Parliament of Uganda, like you rightly state, is a constitutionally established body. And the Parliament has what we call the Human Rights Committee of Parliament. The Human Rights Committee of Parliament was established to promote human rights and to defend human rights in Uganda and promote good governance. Now, but the question is, why is human rights, why did it even have to have a committee of parliament? The issues of human rights are one of the tenets to gauge whether your governance is going on well. So we broadly look at, every time we talk about democracy and good governance. For good governance to take place, there must be democracy. For democracy to exist, there are also tenets that live within democracy. Part of them is transparency, another one is accountability, another one is the rule of law, another one is respect for human rights, another one is free, fair, credible elections, You wanted to tell me, Timothy?
Separation of power.
Separation of power is more of a constitutional mandate. It's not necessarily in the facet of defining democracy. But Montesquieu agrees with you that it is one of the tenets.
Yeah.
No, I think it is.
But for
I think it is
it's
in a
more
democracy
on good governance than simply
democracy.
because good governance embraces democracy. Democracy is a subset of good governance. So when we look at our parliament, has it promoted justice? Has it promoted social justice, number one? Has it promoted equal opportunities for Ugandans? Because these are the things we're going to reflect upon. Has it also promoted the whole question of rights for people, human beings? When the people from Noop kept talking about the people who had disappeared, Parliament said, we have no business with those people. We don't even have the list of the people who you claim have disappeared. Now, the Human Rights Committee of Parliament was supposed to investigate the allegations that were being put before Parliament and come up with a proper report on whether there were disappearances, whether there were people who were still arbitrarily arrested, and whether they were still in prisons, and what was being done by the state, and call government to speak out about the issues that they were being put on spot for. We didn't see any Human Rights Committee report on that issue. We didn't. And on the floor of Parliament, what we saw the Speaker of Parliament saying was that we wait and see what government will tell us about these people who have disappeared. But you saw that when the prisoners came out, they were crying. They shed a lot of tears and they said, why would you kill? They were speaking in Luganda. No. But why do you kill other people's families? Why do you kill relatives of people? These human and people's rights are inherent. They're just supposed to be protected by the state. They're inherent, meaning they are given to you by God. You are entitled to be alive, courtesy of God. It's not the state which gives you oxygen to breathe. The state should just guarantee that you have good security, you can move from here, go to your house, sleep, and come back. But the choice of life is given by God. So that is what we mean by inherent. But we saw people die. During the 2021 election, people died, and that still remains a deficit. What happened to the 54? Some of them were compensated, others were not. The Human Rights Committee of Parliament should have had a comprehensive report about each of the 54 lives that were lost in the 2021 election, and then should have had a report on how do we go from here. We didn't see that coming out. So now, I wanted us to broadly also think about the question of on representation. On representation, all our documents, if you pick our Vision 2040, it states that on representation, we shall have governance through democracy, equal representation. It will be equity. It will be equal opportunities. It will be constructive dialogue. It will be openness. Did we see Parliament having constructive dialogue? In some instances, yes, but in most instances, we saw fights on the floor of Parliament. We even have a member of Parliament who is still in hospital. His name is Zake, because of a discussion around rationalization of government bodies. He was boxed on the floor of Parliament. Now, is that openness? Is that open dialogue? Is that tolerance? Our Vision 2040 talks of tolerance. Our Constitution talks of tolerance. Do we see tolerance? Do we see intolerance? Most of the times that we see the Speaker, she says the ayes have it when it is the nays that have it. She says the nays have it when the ayes have it. So she has been voting on behalf of Parliament, which is illegal. She has overthrown the powers of our representatives. When we talk of separation of powers, which Timothy has brought about in terms of good governance, why do we have separation of powers? We have separation of powers that these institutions will be able to serve the ordinary Ugandan. You see, democracy envisages that it is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. The government of the people, by the people, for the people. If it is of, it means you, the citizen, has that power. Do we actually see that it is the government of the people? No, it is the government of the who? Of the eaters. It is the government of those who have chosen they have power to wield over the poor, gullible people. And it is by the intellectuals, it is by those people who think we now live in the ruling class, we can take over we can treat anybody the way we want to treat them. But ideally, the democracy that we talk about in all our documents should be one that we even see on the floor of Parliament. That when people say no to a certain thing, Parliament goes by what the constituency has asked them to do. But many times we send the Parliament to do another thing, and they do a totally different thing, and you see the public totally in shock with what has happened on the floor of Parliament. We have reforms that are still seated on the floor of Parliament, and these reforms are meant to improve processes of elections. Do we have free, fair elections in Uganda? I will say that is a debate also, but from the court rulings of 2001, 2006, 2016, we do not have free, fair elections in Uganda. And so if the courts, which are supposed to be another arm of government, have stated that we do not have free, fair elections, we should have moved with the reforms that the judges have been talking about to improve processes. We have not seen that comprehensively going on. What we see is more gerrymandering, more creation of districts, more people saying, I'm going to stand for campaigns, and it's going to increase even with the coming election. We now have about 2.2 positions per election. So it's like everybody should be elected. It wouldn't have been bad if the people felt that that representation was doing them good. But the people feel that representation is draining from their pockets.
The question I want to pose to you is that the Constitution contemplates a proactive and assertive Parliament in the promotion of the Constitution and in the defense of the fundamental human rights of the citizens. How would you rate the performance of Parliament for the year ending 2024 in respect of that responsibility?
So maybe just start by building up on what Charity highlights. I think I would want to start by looking at Parliament's ability and capacity to even promote or stand strongly as it is now to promote and protect its real capacity. In terms of the legal framework, in terms of the establishment, as Charity highlights, are clearly exposed within the Constitution. But when it comes to the ability of Parliament to uphold this, to actually be able to effectively implement or issue instruction for some of these things to be done, I think we have a big problem in that line. We, unfortunately, Parliament's ability to actually promote this is greatly affected by a number of things. But more importantly is the continued extension of the executive on the institution of Parliament. And that greatly affects how Parliament views its ability and capacity to actually check the executive. Because while there are checks and balances and the separation of power, unfortunately what we are seeing today is the extension of the executive on the institution of Parliament. So what that means is that many times, while Parliament enjoys the mandate to provide oversight, to provide leadership on matters to do with human rights and other things, including accountability, that is greatly affected. We've seen members of Parliament, we've seen the leadership of Parliament greatly compromised to actually push for this. You've seen sometimes the Human Rights Committee has come up with investigations, has conducted oversight reports, and there's literally nothing in terms of action being taken on those. We recently had a report by the Human Rights Commission around the abductions and the abductions that you highlighted. And some of those things you see that the committee in its report highlights the overbearing nature of the military on institutions but also individuals in the country, and provided very clear recommendations. Unfortunately, none has been put to effect. Now, Parliament continues to provide resources to these institutions to continue doing what they're doing, looking at Parliament's ability to actually check. You've seen Parliament going to conduct oversight visit in some of these areas, and they have been denied access. So there's a fundamental problem in how Parliament is positioned in ensuring that the respect of human rights as envisaged within the Constitution is realized. Two, I think that it would also be important to look at it from the angle that we have a Human Rights Commission, which is fully charged with providing an oversight in the area. There are challenges with the commission. I think their capacity is equally impaired. You've seen how the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission has handled some of the things. Their silence on very critical issues that need to be spoken about, and their silence is very loud. Now, that in essence should be looked at, or the overall governance of the country, because everything, unfortunately, in our context, starts and ends with the executive, and the executive here is not the ministers; it is the presidency, who enjoys both the constitutional mandate, but also a lot of power, both in terms of the control of resource and the military machineries. So what that means is that for the cases such as those that you highlight on the arrest during the elections, up to date, Parliament has not taken a very firm position, because Parliament actually has the power, including the power of issuing resources to some of these institutions, and they can actually make, if they are firm and say we are not going to issue any resources until these recommendations are acted upon. Ensuring that they take very firm positions. The committees, we've been pushing for the Human Rights Committee to be actually classified as an accountability committee. We are not yet there, but I think it's something that is being discussed to see how the Human Rights Committee in Parliament can be more effective. There are issues to do with recent incidences where you saw members of Parliament were clobbered while they were considering some of the bills, during the RAPEX bills. It just goes ahead to speak to you that while we have a Parliament that can speak very firm or can come out very clearly, they don't actually have power. They're also victims of the whole discussions. Uganda is a signatory to international frameworks, and most of them actually are very clear, and they speak to what our constitution provides. We've substantially gone against most of those, and I think that human rights has ceased to be a focus for this institution. Unfortunately, that also should be looked at how the establishment is today, because with the kind of structure we have, where you have a strong presidency, that comes at a cost of accountability. It comes at the cost of transparency, respect of human rights, and all the other components. And so I think that Parliament, unfortunately, is a victim. I would not want them to look at themselves in that manner, but they are. But they have a chance to reclaim and make very firm position if they choose. Unfortunately, they have left themselves at the mercy of the executive. And so its ability to push for human rights, its ability to actually engage the people and to ensure that the executive provide clear implementation of these things still remains unclear.
Professor, the two pre-current speakers seem to reach the consensus that our Parliament lacks the requisite capacity to promote and defend the Constitution, or even to protect the fundamental human rights of the citizens. I want to ask you, as a citizen, what is your perspective of this issue?
Thank you. My perspective can best be captured by the statement of President Museveni. You know, President Museveni is a big player in this governance issue, governance of Uganda and whatever. We are talking about rule of law, laws, the constitution, procedures, and these kind of things. And I think he made a statement, it's not mine, he did say that laws are just like blue band. Just blue band, you just put blue band on bread and spread. But even if you don't have blue band, you take bread. The issue, the fundamental food value is in the bread, not the blue band. And he said the bread is politics, not the laws, not the constitution, not the blue band. So we have to go with the bread, not the blue band. So about this topic of ours today, I think we are mainly concerning ourselves with the role of Parliament in oversight, in the oversight function.
Yes.
Basically. So to oversight, you must have, they said, capacity. And here capacity, we are not talking about capacity in terms of knowledge. They have the knowledge. They know what they are doing. But actions are not necessarily motivated by the technical capacity you have, but the values you hold. So most of these MPs go to Parliament as survivors. They just look for a job and they survive. In most cases, they buy the votes and they go there. And their instinct of survival guides them. So it is where they see how they will survive, not how they provide a public good. So Parliament has tried to exercise its oversight role, like say, even this year, I think, censoring some ministers. They censor, nothing happens. Now, your oversight role has stopped there. They make certain resolutions, and the executive just ignores. There are parliamentary committees. When you talk about oversight functions, you normally go to the committees. And the committees have made statements, resolutions, now and then, ignored. Some reports, Human Rights Commission report, Equal Opportunities Commission report, whatever reports, because those other, what we call horizontal accountability or horizontal decentralization, is that decentralization on the same level of government or the executive, like oversight committees, or oversight institutions. You have Parliament itself, you have the IGG, you have the Human Rights Commission, you have Equal Opportunities Commission, you have the judiciary and the others. Now, all these are doing whatever they are doing at the whims of the executive or the president, for that matter. And whatever reports they have made, they have been of no consequence as far as following the rule of law is concerned. And Parliament has allowed itself to be used. Or I don't know whether they have allowed themselves, it's because of the structural fundamental problems that I'm saying this in many times, but sometimes it's not well captured. It's because we don't have a nation state. We are a nationless state.
So Parliament is not a nation
institution
in the
You see,
sense.
it is an institution of some individuals that do not have a lot they share in common in terms of values. I'm talking about civic values. Take the example of social justice, that the parliamentarians are immersed in the social justice values and principles, and they are ready to sacrifice to promote that value. And that you have a caucus in Parliament, which you don't have. By now I expected those civic values caucuses, not these tribal caucuses that are predominant, that you have a social justice caucus or equality caucus, which cuts across the ethnic groups. transethnic caucuses.
Professor, there is a committee for human rights in Parliament, which, Timothy here was arguing, is effectively want to, call for accountability in the area of human rights, the promotion of justice, and the like.
So what have they done? That's the point I'm talking about. They have remained blue band. What have they done? It is there, and that committee, when they are making their decisions or they are listening or whatever, they look at their backs. They first wait, where is the side that the president is falling to? The chairman. These days, because the majority of them are NRM, they say, what is the position of the chairman? Until they know the position of the chairman, that is when they will kind of want to take action. Once they guess that the chairman is this direction, they will either follow that direction or they will simply keep quiet. There is no sense of doing anything by Parliament for the public good, for the general good of this country. It is survival. How do I survive in this one? So we have had human rights violated. Here we are even talking about the negative rights. I don't know whether that committee also deals with the positive rights. That you have almost 90% or 80% of people who enroll in P1 reach HSC, and Parliament is keeping quiet. Because I thought the right to education is a human right. The right to health is a human right.
It is.
The right to housing is a right. The right to sanitation is a right.
Yes.
But they went to Ruboa, I think it was this year. You saw them being chased away. Can you imagine the whole of Parliament, which is supposed to be a very big institution, supposedly having powers as allocated to them by the Constitution, but not on the ground. Then they go knocking on the gate of Ruboa, and they are supposed to appropriate those funds, and then a gate man simply say, you fellas, go away. A gate man telling you go away. And the minister goes there, go away. What have you come to do here? Until we get authority from above. And that is the challenge we have, that we have these institutions purportedly working in liberal democracy, but we don't have yet liberal democracy. I think we had a constitution and then institutions. On the surface, they look to be promoting liberal democracy, but underneath, that liberal democracy is not there at all, almost. It is still blue band. It is just having politics, which is not located in liberal democracy. It is like, to use a biblical expression, we have new wine in old bottles. Or we have a new bottle with old wine. The point I'm trying here is that we have values of authoritarianism, of autocracy, of dictatorship, of liberal democracy. Those are the values that are in the governance. These other liberal institutions and liberal laws are just the blue band. And the blue band, you can have it, you can do away with it, depending on the convenience. Once in a while you can say, but I think I don't have appetite, so let me take the put on blue band. In other words, what am I talking about? We have a parliament that is supposed to exercise its mandate of oversight. And therefore, oversighting what? Oversighting, for example, the Constitution, to make sure that the Constitution is operational. So you say the Constitution says power lies with the people. Really, is there any average Ugandan who thinks that power lies with the people? Here we are talking about power of deciding whether this road should go here or the other way, whether we should take a loan or we shouldn't take it, whether we should amend the Constitution or we shouldn't amend. Is that power lying with the Constitution? And has Parliament tried to even look at the Constitution and the laws and maybe amend them accordingly to empower the people. Because if power belongs to the people as the fundamental principle that we allocate ourselves to, when you look at constitutional amendments that we have made since this constitution was made, they have been strengthening the power of the state and decreasing the power of the people. You see, you just look at them. Let anybody have an inventory of all the amendments. I think Center for Constitutional Governance should do that one. Have them, all of them, and you will see they have been strengthening the power of the state and decreasing the power of the citizens. And the Parliament has watched, or has not even watched. They are the ones who have passed those laws. Now, finally, let me comment on one law. We are talking about laws. We have concentrated maybe even on human rights issues. There is I'm going to talk about a law which actually is related to what the Parliament is doing on oversight every day. There is, I think, a Public Finance Management Act. Public Finance Management Act, upon which the executive should follow, looking at these finances, how they go, whether they are used accordingly. And the Auditor General, nearly for every department of government, Minister of Government, has demonstrated how the government, the executive, has not followed the Public Finance Management Act. Every day we see this one, whether it is the Public Accounts Committee, whether it is another committee, they have shown how it is not following. But it ends there. In fact, they raise too much of our appetite and our feelings that something is going to be done by seeing those things on TV. This committee is meeting, but nothing is done on the ground. If one was to do an audit of parliamentary resolutions concerning their resolutions, how government is not following those acts, is not following those procedures. There are very many, but none, almost none, is being followed as it should be. Therefore, Parliament has decided to disempower itself by either individuals fearing to act and they don't have courage to act, or institutionally, generally, the Parliament has a history of being subservient to the executive in Uganda, and that is where we are.
Doctor, speaking of individuals, let us now spotlight the leadership of Parliament. This year has been a very turbulent year for Parliament in a sense that it has contended with a lot of scandals. The Speaker was sanctioned by foreign powers, Britain and the United States, on account of her involvement in brazen corruption. And there is also a charge for her involvement into practice to abuse human rights and the like. So, is it a nexus between the leadership of Parliament and the failure of the Parliament to observe and discharge its role in the protection and promotion of the Constitution? Or you could say it is on account of other factors altogether. Is the leadership a factor in this question?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think in responding to the issues you raise, I will try to find, gravity with what Charity put across. The framework is clear. The framework is here with us. She has looked at the Constitution, and she has looked at all the other possible accountability sources that we have to be able to, find resilience, find resilience in our constitutional processes, rule of law, and all that. You raise a very interesting element, leadership. I will add, just for purposes of context, that leadership is crucial, but the attitude of leadership is even more crucial. What is the attitude? I'll tell you something very interesting, just to illustrate this point. I was just looking at the President Museveni's the State of the Nation address, 2004. And I was trying to look at the key highlights. In relation to accountability, human rights, and rule of law, he actually affirms government's commitment to fostering democracy, economic transformation, and security, and emphasizes the element of socio-economic development as central. Now, I want to pick 3 subsections in this. That is the socio-economic. I want to look at what you'd call the net worth of a Ugandan in the last 10 years. Viz education. Look at the net worth of a Ugandan and what is available as safeguards and guarantees for both personal health and public health in the last 10 years. Look at education again in terms of per capita investment. When you look at and every year we have the annual policy ministerial statements. One of the key common denominator in all this, interestingly, and it amazes me how we Ugandans and the citizens just casually look at these things, whether we look or we don't. What has been happening in terms of budgetary allocations is that increasingly the Ministry of Defense or Defense's budget and the President's office budget are on the rise. Timothy mentioned how we are very good. We are good citizens. We are good international citizens because we have almost ascribed and affirmed our willingness to cooperate and uphold a number of international conventions, crucial ones, including climate change, including food safety and security. We now have nuances like the pandemics and all that. Excuse me. So I want to try and do my assessment against that background. So what do I see? One, all that I see in Parliament as an overall statement is what you'd call political pandering. And starting with the President. Because he actually talks about these things. If you go in the nomenclature of his speech, he talks about human rights, he talks about accountability, and even lays strategies of how to fight them. But in the end assessment, what happens? I'm inclined to believe that probably, do we just have a feeble parliament? Do we have a parliament that probably is not astute enough, in terms of even skill? I actually want to depart from the professor's thesis.
You mean the
Yes, these parliamentarians are skilled. I don't want to believe so, because look, I just want to look at three broad areas, which are very, what you'd call eminent of parliamentary business. One thing is, for instance, legal drafting, skills in legal drafting. We have had cases where laws have been challenged and thrown out. That means the safeguards put in terms of drafting are wanting. And in addition to this, by the way, we also have a certain character of our parliament that we need to keep in mind. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, do you know that we have a parliament that actually every circle, parliamentary circle, returning, we have almost up to 67 plus new members of parliament. So retention in the house is a big deal. And that speaks to something. Probably it says the people are vigilant on one hand, but it could also say that parliamentary elections are just another form of political pandering. Because you see, even the president himself, when he is naming his success story, he says one of the things in guaranteeing democracy in Uganda is that we have always had a successful elective cycle. And we've had this cycle now coming to, I think, 30 years. But if you subjected it to vigorous scrutiny, what do you see? I have 3 points I want to make in my conclusion thoughts. One is that I think we need to call for more civicness amongst our population. I have argued before that in democracies or in the notion of accountability, the more information you have about a person, individuals, or an institution, especially at election time, really determines the quality of the person you're having. The NRM government has been very strategic and has recognized the fact that most Ugandan is in the rural area. And two, that Ugandan does not actually get the kind of information they need to have to hold this government accountable. And that is demonstrable. Look at the pattern of the voting in the rural and the urban. Kampala and its nearest environs have probably put the biggest contestation against the people in leadership. And for me, for many reasons, but one of them I think is because there is at least a fair amount of information about these dealings. All these issues of human rights, all these issue of human rights abuses we're talking about, the issues of affront, blatant affront to democracy, including draconian laws being passed. Because as we are speaking, by the way, the civic space has been reduced to almost naught. The NGO Act, the amended laws within the media and the press realm.
In a minute, doctors will sum up.
Yes. So what I'm beginning to see, and then the last one is government has marshaled a narrative, and an interesting narrative. It is continued to project itself from revolutionarist now to nationalist hero. And they have adopted a sense, particularly the military, a sense of messianism. The argument is that we are Christ-like. So if you replace this Jesus, what happens? I think it was in the election of 1996, where some government proponents or propagandists, remember when they brought the skulls of Luero in advertisements. So the issue of peace security has remained a factor of play, but not necessarily to entrench the fundamentals that we have gained, but it has been more a space of instilling fear and fear of the unknown. And until we craft an art to make the people understand that space of the unknown fear, I think we are held up in a conundrum. So this parliament is basically a pandering parliament. Yes.
What a damning verdict Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. Do stay with us.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. This is Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we continue examining the performance of Parliament in the promotion of the Constitution and the protection of the fundamental human rights. Charity, to kickstart us off again in this segment, let us now interrogate the outward role of the military security apparatus of the country in the emasculation of the institutions. In this year, we now have a notorious case of the General Court Martial, where the Constitutional Court has wrote in a landmark decision that it is unconstitutional to try civilians before the General Court Martial. That decision was stayed by the Supreme Court on account of an appeal that was lodged by the Attorney General. So a decision of the Supreme Court is pending. But increasingly, the military has become an active and forceful actor into the governance space. So even as we look ahead to 2026, what is your analysis of this matter? How do we confront the monster that is the military and have it rolled back into the barracks?
So I don't know if you've taken note that on that day Zake had a fight with his fellow member of parliament. It started with, I've seen a man with a gun in this house. If you go back and play those clips, it was about someone who had a gun. And then suddenly he kept pointing and saying, that's the man whom I have seen with a pistol in his trouser. And the speaker then asked the sergeant at arms to go and do the check, because the sergeant said, it's my duty to ensure nobody enters into the presence of parliament with a gun. But it will not be the first time that we even saw weapons on the floor of parliament. When the previous speaker, who is Rebecca Kadaga, was in parliament, and it was the amendment of Article 102B, there were again allegations of guns and security operatives on the floor of parliament. Then we had Justice Ogola write a poem on the invasion of the justice, of the sanctuary. He called it a sanctuary of hope, a sanctuary of justice, has been raped by what he called the Black Mambas. That poem still stands tall. People might have forgotten he wrote a poem. Those who know, they know it will live the test of time. The temple of justice was raped by Black Mambas. Now that, as much as I talk about it with emphasis on the lighter side, he had a message for Uganda. He had a message for the military. That every institution of government has a place to which it belongs. So the UPDF is governed by the Uganda People's Defense Forces Act. The UPDF Act is very clear on the mandate of the UPDF. It is clear on when the UPDF should come out and when the UPDF should stay on wait and watch to protect the country. The UPDF should never be used to clobber civilians. The UPDF should never be used to mistreat or cause human rights violations. And that's why the Human Rights Enforcement Act, which now the Attorney General is again saying he wants amended because it has given too much powers to the courts to hold people accountable for perpetuating torture and for perpetuating human rights violations upon people. But I am so grateful that the president signed that instrument. That instrument is in tandem with the laws of Uganda, that it talks about the military doing its job to protect Uganda's territorial boundaries. Now, the UPDF should only come out to protect the internal if there is danger. Let's assume they are ADF rebels now, yes, like we've been having bombs happening all over and whatever. The UPDF can take over because then it is a territorial thing. It's a territorial matter. The security of the country is at stake. And the Act is very clear about that. But when it is election matters, when it is issues of parliament, disagreements on the floor of parliament, the UPDF has no business having guns on the floor of parliament. The UPDF has no business beating up anyone or even coming to intimidate any member of parliament on the floor of parliament. So how do we then tackle, how do we get them back into the barracks is what you ask me. I think one of the things that needs to continually be done is that we need to establish more desks of human rights lawyers within the UPDF. There are lawyers within the UPDF who have studied the law and they understand these things. And they know about international frameworks on human rights. They know international frameworks on the use of force, on aggressiveness, on attack, on when you can't attack, when there is self-defense. They know international instruments on the whole question of abuse of citizens' rights.
Charity, is it really a question of legal competence or institutional attitude towards
yes,
the question of
the
human
only
rights?
way to strengthen that institution of the military, to understand their role in protecting human rights, is to have those desks to speak to the military. Remember, they are always in training. They are always having refresher trainings. They're always having refresher training courses. They're always having issues to say, we have new gunships now, we're going to try this out. They should be trained on knowing how to use those weapons and what it means in international realm, regional realm, and national and geographical realm. That is why I vouch for human rights lawyers to be at all these various centers of the military. That's the only way we're going to get them back to the barracks. That's the only way we're going to get them back to understand why they do what they do. Outside that, they will just say, order ni moja. Because they are told at the training, order ni moja, shoot, shoot. If you look at the Nazis and what happened during the time of the Nuremberg trials, the Nuremberg trials established what we call international criminal proceedings. They were the first criminal proceedings that were carried out on an international spectrum. The Germans were asked, why were you killing the Jews like that? Just slaughtering them, putting them in chambers and killing them. They said it was an order from our supreme military command. So for us, we were fulfilling our mandate as given to us by the state. So during the Nuremberg trials, it was now established that, look, it is important to identify what is the jurisdiction for a military force. What can they do even if the commander has given a certain order, if it contravenes the international standards of respecting human rights, of respecting borders of other people, of respecting jurisdictions. And that was determined, and we now have what we call the International Criminal Court of Justice. We have the Permanent Court of Justice, and from there we also have the International Criminal Court, ICC. So ICC, ICJ, and the Permanent Court are a result of what happened during the Nuremberg trials.
Thank you, Charity, for that exposition. Tim, on the political front again, there has been so much talk of proposed reforms targeting the electoral spectrum of the country. We are yet to realize that the Minister of Justice, the Honorable Mao, in a self-stated confirmation, had espoused it as his objective to ensure that he negotiates what he called a smooth transfer or transition of power from Mr. Museveni to a new leader for the country. We don't know. We are in darkness about how that has progressed. Do we still have hopes that that could be achieved with, of course, the participation of Parliament in this town?
Yeah. Thank you, Isaac. Allow me just start by commenting a bit on what you asked Charity. So the president this morning issued a statement in light of the recent engagements with the military court, the court martial, and he gives the history of what informed for the establishment of that court, but also how civilians formed themselves there. So he gives a history of the Karamoja insurgencies and how civilians who acquire guns had to be tried, and that by acquiring guns you had placed yourself within the scope of the court. He goes ahead to highlight the efficiencies of this court in terms of dealing but also handling these matters. And so he emphasizes that I think these courts are still very important in terms of ensuring that it creates peace for the country but also for the justice. He gives a bit of context in light of the case backlog within the
Mainstream.
And that's why the court martial comes in handy
As
to
an
address
intervention.
as an intervention. A position that he has actually made this morning in a statement. Now, I think for me, one of the things, among the many things I do, after proper analysis, I noticed that while Parliament, the work I do is around Parliament and the same, I noticed that there seemed to be nothing that substantial coming out of this side. So what I did, and my team, we decided to create a depository of the president's statements, these things that he keeps putting out, including some of these things. So he puts out, whether it's the statements of the budget, whatever he puts out, they look sometimes very, not very clear, but when you collect them, you see where the mind of the president is. He is issued this morning, and for sure anyone who cares will know that the position has been set, including the judiciary, that we are waiting for them to issue, we are waiting for the Supreme Court to issue a position. By the fact that the president has issued this statement, they will read the environment and toe the line. I don't foresee a situation where the Supreme Court will issue a ruling anytime soon. It may take a bit more longer after the president has given this position. The same is with Parliament. The oversight role and some of the rulings and motions that would ideally be pushed towards the direction have already been settled. So there are very many interesting items that come from these statements that you see the president writing, and it informs how the country is going. And that for anyone who cares to understand and also appreciate how they would want to engage, advocate, but also look at the future of the country, it comes from these things. And so I agree with what Charity highlights in terms of the position of the injustice that anybody who appears in court martial, especially for the civilians, is likely to face. And so what the Constitutional Court the position it gave waiting for the Supreme Court, I think entirely summarizes where we should be going. But more importantly, looking at it from the question you asked of Honorable Norbert Mao and his desire to ensure that we can have a continuous conversation to see a transition or to see a change of government or even to have a national dialogue. There are many colleagues who champion the national dialogue, like Professor here, who are very passionate, and I think it's a thing that we should push for. Unfortunately, I think that the current structure and listening to the president, these may not come anytime soon, because every person, and I think also Mao must have realized after he brought after he proposed to make the transition, and some of those that were captured in those proposals, I think the delay could have been that he decided to bring the proposals before listening what the other side is saying. And I think it's also a lesson that probably you need to listen what the upper office is saying first before acting, which compromises the overall goal. The question is that as a country we should be able to push for what is important. And some of those reforms, most of them are out of time, and Charity can actually confirm, because that's our area of speciality. We are out of time, and that even if the cabinet considered them, we may not get a lot out of that. But nonetheless, I think that they are good components for us to discuss. And so there is a fundamental problem in the attitude of the leadership on top of what they envisage this country going, but also more importantly, assessing the risk that it poses for the continuous stay in power. And so there is looking at the attitude, looking at the statement. So you see the president issuing the statement today in light of the court martial continuing to try civilians. A position that the Constitutional Court has guided, but the Supreme Court a bit is taking longer, and it will take longer now that the president has given this position. So I think we have a long way to go, but nonetheless, I think not all is lost. It's in the best interest of us as a country, of everyone really, to see a peaceful transition, to see a situation that the governance gets or feeds into the aspirations of Ugandans. You see, there is very little to benefit any of us where we lose a life for the case of transition. It doesn't serve anyone, because there's quite a lot that we've been able to galvanize for now, and we don't want to lose that. We can want to build on that. Unfortunately, if things remain as it is, we are likely to be in a space where we'll make some steps back before we can go ahead. Yeah.
But I think, Isaac, one thing we shouldn't lose from what Timothy is saying here is that even if the president has said what he has said, in terms of separation of powers, the judiciary should stand its feet. That is why we talk about separation of powers. So the president can have his opinion. Yes, it's not going to, but ideally, that's the ideal situation, that the judiciary should have come out and said, this is it. The correct position is that civilians should not be tried in military courts, because that is what our constitution stands for. That is what the laws stand for. And the laws require, one of the mandates of the judiciary is to defend the constitution, to defend the laws of Uganda.
That's a sobering opinion. Professor, what can Parliament practically do? And I said this in the context of our current Parliament, to banish its reputation as a mediating force between the competing political interests in the country, especially with respect to the overreach of the executive.
Thank you. I think I have said it here, I will say it again. When members of Parliament wanted the President's office to leave the building, parliamentary building, because there is President's office, and because they didn't have physical space, enough physical space, they were asking government or the President to remove his office from there so that they can occupy that wing where there is President's office. His response was that, do you know that we captured you? That's what he said. That when we reached Kampala, we captured the parliament. Now, has it brought out of captivity? We don't have institutional independence. We don't have that balance of power. And we are eroding institutions. So they are already eroded, they are weak. They are not there to mediate conflicts. And that's the danger of this country. I will give you the example of South Korea, which I think is also emerging out of, it's an emerging nation, but it has reached a higher level than we have. The president declared, of South Korea that is, declared martial law.
Yeah.
And the parliament said, Mr. President, where do you get those powers? In fact, the president he went hiding.
Yeah.
He was saved by members of his party who later refused to participate in the other one. And the Minister of Defense is already in prison.
In jail.
In jail, and he was contemplating committing suicide. And I think police raided the president's office to get evidence of that declaration, because they are trying to see whether they can get. So imagine a situation where in Uganda, police goes to president's office to check for documents. Imagine a situation where our parliament refuses that directive. And imagine a situation where the army was ordered. What do they say in the military when you order?
Order ni moja. They are ordered.
They were directed to go and invade the parliament
Yeah.
and stop parliament from acting. The military went there and said, nah, yeah. Really? Is this order justified? Is this the rightful order? And they said, no. We are not going to invade the parliament.
They disobeyed the order.
They just went back. And in fact, those who accepted the order, I think they are already arrested. They are already arrested. I saw the deputy commander, somebody like that. One of the officers actually putting on spot his commander, that this commander was the one saying we should go there. Now they are going to prosecute that commander who said we go to parliament. You see the institutional autonomy? So if we don't have such institutional autonomy, we are not going far in organizing the state. Forget about even these issues of democracy. Me, I'm concerned about building the state and building the nation. Because if one of the commanders said we go to parliament, here in Uganda that is, we go to parliament to beat those people, they would definitely go and beat. But in case one of them said he was not in favor of the beating, the first criteria they would put on that commander is which tribe does he come from?
Yeah.
Is he from this region? Is he from this region? No wonder. So let's get away from those. I have told this nation that unless we have a nation created around civic values, e.g., like such as equality,
Social justice.
liberty of the people, unity in diversity, pluralism, so that all the people in the whole country look at certain principles and ideals that unite them. We are united around those ideals and are ready to defend them. This business of saying that you will have the parliament now holding the military accountable, we are now talking about the military. There is a constitutional provision in our constitution that the military shall be subordinate to the
Civilian
authority. Does any Ugandan think today that the military is subordinate to civilian authority?
Impossible.
Members of the Parliamentary Committee on Defense went to Masaka, and Jim Muhwezi, General Muhwezi met them there. I saw him even in terms of what do we call it? Symbolic language. Yeah. He was telling the members of Parliament to get off, go home, Kampala, leave military issues to the military. What are you doing here? What do you know? And Kahindo Tafile later went to Parliament and told them, you know, me, I have been an insurgent. What you know, I know. That was Kaindotafiri.
Telling now Muhwezi.
No, this time he was telling members of parliament in the committee in parliament, what you know,
I know.
I know. What I know, you don't know. Keep off.
From the military.
Keep off. Now, how do you hold the military accountable? Because in terms of today, we have been discussing the question of oversight.
Yes.
How do you oversight somebody who is telling you to keep off? These are not your issues. Where were you when we were in the bush? So, we don't have that attitude. First of all, attitude issues. Attitude and norms are very critical, but people don't see them. Those are intangibles. Those software issues. They go to the hardware issues of there is a law, there is a constitutional provision. Yes, there is a constitutional provision that the military would be under civilian authority control, but they are not. Actually, last night we were on UTV and Opio brought something that was very interesting for people to observe. He looked at the body language. He used the body language. Look at the body language of the court-martial judges. He said they were not writing any notes. They were not writing when people were submitting. Nothing. They were folding their hands like I am folding them here. Meaning that the judgment was already made outside the court. You don't have to write. They were not writing. You know, not even a single sentence. You know, judges normally take notes, even if you are capturing them now in the digital world. Still, you have to write notes to remind you. Judges were not writing at all. If you watch them on TV, meaning, why should they write anyway? Why should the decision was made, or the decision is going to be made outside the court, so I don't need to write. I just hold my hands. These people can talk, the defense team can talk, the prosecution people can talk. I hold my hands because it is not what is coming from the mouth of the defense team or from the prosecution team that will determine the outcome of the judgment I will make here. It is going to be made elsewhere. He was did you see the judge? He was not writing anything. Not writing. You can talk. That is your business. If you have to talk, you talk. So what am I saying? There must be a shift. There must be an ideological shift, a mindset shift, a normative framework shift of the governance processes, of human rights processes, and that will be the guarantee for having a well-functioning state system, and by extension, the legal system. But if you have old wine in new bottles, or the other way around, and you think that by having the laws in place, but let's have this law, let's have amendment, but the law is there, even a fundamental law is there in the constitution that the military will be subject to civilian control. But in Uganda, President Museveni puts it very clear. He put it very clearly when he was voting for the army having representation in parliament, which I find anomaly because the army is part of the executive, but now they are officially in parliament, in the legislature. But when they asked him, what are they going to do there? Especially in respect of him, when he was instructing them not to engage in debate there, he says their role there are listening posts. That is why they are there, listening posts. Some of you who do not understand the military language, a listening post is supposed to be a spy. So he put the members of the military in the parliament, and I want to believe, and I think I'm right, that the military are taking notes in parliament, not in the court martial. In parliament, they are observing and taking notes. Who is saying what? Who has opposed the idea of coffee development authority going here? Who does what? So they are listing people and then making a report, a brief to the president, so that next time the elections in 2026, we know whom to support and we know whom to support. And don't think members of parliament are stupid. They know that the military are there taking notes on them, especially those men of the NRM. And for survival, I told you they have survival instincts. That those are the ones which guide them. Because they know somebody is taking notes, they censor themselves. Not because they cannot say what they wanted to say. Even people talked about capacity. Me, I think they have the capacity. Of course, not to what we would expect. It is Olanya, the late Olanya, the late Speaker of Parliament, when he was Deputy Speaker. He said that he did research and followed the Hansards and discovered that the first Parliament of Uganda in 1960 was better than the current Parliament. Why did he make that conclusion? In submissions, in oversight, in whatever, that they were better than the current Parliament. And these were primary teachers. Primary teachers of those days were even grade 2, not even grade 3 like today, which is even being removed and saying that they must be graduates. I don't know how we shall have graduates. That is like buying a Mercedes-Benz or Prado and driving it at the speed of a bicycle. I don't know what a graduate will be doing in nursery. But that's a discussion for another day. The problem, the issue I am making here is that we need to have a normative shift in Africa. But this one should be informed by the goal of having a nation state. Latin America is failing to make it because their nation state is in question. Southeast Asia has got old nations. If you go to Japan, Japan society has lived there for a long time. Chinese civilization is older than these European civilizations people are talking about, by the way. That's why China is overtaking them. The Chinese civilization is very old. The Indian civilization is very old. The Korean civilization is very old. The Vietnamese civilization is very old. So they already had nation states, and now they are adding all these things of fine-tuning. In Africa, post-colonial Africa, we don't have functioning nation states. We are nationless states. The state was imposed on us by the British, and they didn't do much to create a nation. And the post-colonial governments have also failed to make a state, to make a functioning state, first of all, and then a functioning nation. So the failure of state functioning, where you have the laws but you don't follow them, you have the laws, you don't follow them at all. How can the parliament play its role of oversight when they are looking at their backs every time they are deliberating there? You know how they claim to be stupid, if I can use that word. They will pass something in the parliament overwhelmingly without much, with overwhelming consensus. It goes to the president. He says, I don't believe this one. I call it the caucus. They are following it.
They will change a bit.
All of them who had a consensus, they say he was right, we are wrong. Yeah. Within no minute? What is it that changed you? You know, if we can go back in history and go to this opening up the movement system from our party, they went to Changwanzi. All NRM people went to Changwanzi. They had already formed a committee headed by, I think, I don't know who.
Bidan. Oh, yes.
Bidan wrote a minority report. So they went there, they were all for continuation of the movement system. They were saying, without a movement system, I would rather die, I would rather go back to the bush. And then President Museveni said, you think I support Bidan, son? Hey, everybody said, hey, I think we're stupid. I think the president is right. Everybody. Is this how we are running this country? Surely can't these political elites have where they anchor? They should have values and principles and ideas where they can anchor and say, let's go by these ones. Because we need to have this country of ours, which is a country, which is a hardware. We don't have a software. We don't have those ideals. We are not anchored in ideals of nation building. And as long as we don't have those, even if you have judicial reviews and you have new laws, they will remain blue band. They will remain a blue band on the bread, which is the bread, first of all, the bread of eating, those who want to eat. But secondly, what the president will say is what they will do. If we don't have institutional balance, I am liking what is going on in South Korea. There is institutional balance. And finally, okay, the members of parliament also of the ruling party, when they saw that the opposition wanted to use them, at least when they reached somewhere, they said, no, let's keep our president. But at least they first refused the presidential directive of martial law. But after refusing that one, they say, okay, now we can. But that was also their decision. They said, let's protect our chairman of our party, and we move on. So you see, there is balancing. Me, I prefer to use the word balancing, like more than even the other one of independence, of autonomy, of the different arms of government. We need a balance, and we are failed to have a balance. So, Mr. Moderator, to conclude, I am saying that Parliament cannot balance the boat, cannot do the balancing act of holding the executive accountable through parliamentary oversight unless we have some collective value among parliamentarians as a group to advance this nation to another level. If we remain with survival instincts, let me survive. What is number one saying? I must first listen to that one. Why? Not because they don't have the capacity. The capacity they don't have is values and norms. But because they have survival instincts. How do I survive in the coming elections? I can only survive when I toe the line, regardless of me as a political animal standing for a value, a norm, and a goal. But I think Ugandans have not understood the goal of nation building. Once you don't have that collective national identity, and you are still divided, you will not achieve much in terms of actions. When they go for actions, some people will divert and will say, but who is this leading us? Where does he come from? What is his religion? What is his OB school? Me, I'm not going with you. So it is not what is right that is guiding that decision, that position taking. It is my survival. That's my take.
Let me build on that by asking Dr. Tu. Professor here has challenged the political elite of the country to get anchored as a means to facilitating a delicate balancing act between the key political institutions of the state and in the process achieve nation building. In terms of recommendations, what proposals would you give to Parliament or the entire political class as a whole as a means of improving our governance systems?
Yeah, I think, and not only the good professor, but both Charity and Timothy have given us potent exposure on what is and what is available as alternatives. Because the law is there, the principles are there, and how, the interaction of what you'd call effect impact. By citing a number of examples, Timothy gave a very interesting scenario of understanding the president from what he says and how this then impacts on the collective political
polity.
Yeah, the polity, the ideal, what is visioning, and I want to pick it from there. I had a private conversation with Professor Ndebasa a couple of days ago, and I was telling him that I have also noticed that given the challenges that our administration is facing, particularly arising from the demands of our friends or partners that we call the West, you know, the Europe and America, especially in this market economy, knowing very well that we run a budget that is supported, you know, almost more than 60%. And that comes with trappings. And I made this point that I begin to notice an attempt to shift to the East, particularly with our sort of reinforced and highlighted relationship with China and the rest of these people. And that is without even thinking of interrogating the quality of this relationship with China. But at least we have decided, we are beginning to think in terms of novelty, that probably this is a lesser devil. And I think when you come back to we, the citizens and Ugandans, I want to think that there is much more opportunity now than before. Why? One, thank God, like Charity said, there are some legal instruments that are really cardinal. And in spite of, you know, the chaotic situation, we have had them sail through.
Yes.
And that is something for us to hold on to. You know, that's one. Two, the global sphere, the whole element, the whole idea of globalization, there's a big opportunity in it. And I think we just need to start to think strategically. But I want to say that the weapon, we have discussed the increased militarism. And before we broke, I warned over, you know, the false notion or narrative being pushed of the messiahs. You know, I find it I find it interesting that you meet people who tell you that, look, a lot of things are not working in this country. But when you look at the sectoral relationship of public administration, you can't say one part is working and another one is not working. If it is not working, it is not working.
Yes.
If it is working, it is working.
Yes.
But they are quick to qualify that everything else is failing, but the military is working. Another, and you go back to Timothy, what Timothy is saying. The president, by the way, seems to be a very good source of open intelligence. He's always making very interesting remarks, and I like the methodology the professor uses in catching him in his own, you know, cleavage. Because recently the president said we had sort of fought corruption in the military, but I think it is come back. It is rearing its head. It is serious. So those are pointers. Now, what am I trying to say in a nutshell? We need, is there an opportunity? Yes, it is. What do we need to do? We have this civic space, and that is the only weapon we have left. We are, although operating in a fairly chaotic or tumultuous atmosphere on one side, but also advantageous on the other. The flip side is that this space is largely taken up by youth. This space is largely taken up by a largely rural-based population, but also very poor. You see, the other thing we need to start thinking about in this country is that democracy cannot work
with poverty.
With poverty.
Absolutely.
And this is the chaos we are talking about.
Yes.
Now, the other, you know, it's like the going to the courts. In law, we say we make petitions and prayers. What you ask for is what you get. Last week I was attending the East Africa Law Society convention in Munyoni. I was giving a paper on accountability. We had the benefit of now the transitioning Justice Mugeni moving from the EACJ to COMESA. And she shared some insights which were interesting. Because one of the things we were saying is that why is it that this court only gives declaratory decisions? Then she challenged us and said, but ask yourselves, as users of the court, as the officers of the court, what do you come to ask for? You come to ask for declarations.
Yeah.
But the treaty
Allows you power.
gives more, allows and gives more than just declarations. So, Prof, going back to the issue of, the capabilities in Parliament, you can have a tool. You can have a tool. You work with frameworks. The more you use it,
Yes.
the better you get
Yes.
out of it.
Yes. Yes.
But you cannot have a parliament characterized, and I don't want to be derogatory, but this parliament has many issues. Which
We've had
includes
the
the scheme.
corruption exhibition. We had the Mabati theft and none concluded. The president wrote and said, this time I'm going to finish them. I'm going to come after them. We were all clapping our hands and saying, yes. And then
Yeah, you see?
we saw nothing happen.
Yeah, so for me, conclusively, I really think that we normatively we have this parliament, yes. But we just need to go back to the basics as Ugandans. For me, the entry point or point of departure is by the way our education system. We are all complaining, but this system up to now has not given me evidence that it is producing critical thinkers. Because at the level, just like Prof was saying, how, if you deserve that title of honorable and you've thought through what you have done, in the morning, today you say this, and in the morning, you shift a position without even remorse. The other day I was saying here that we have members of parliament who largely are people who left the village the other day with a kavera, came to look for fortunes in town, and now they come back with a small briefcase and are speaking some fake English accent and saying, some people called me to come back. Again, messianism. So let us just go to the basic of, say, three things. One, let's give basic public information. Let's empower the citizens. There are people in the villages who do not even know that a policeman can be accused. Because policemen are committing crimes in the villages. Maybe the way they are handling cases. But the police is almost like the buck stops with the police.
Yes.
Can we in civic space, can we let the people know that there is something like the Police Standards Agency?
Yes.
Avail the numbers in the villages where at least my grandmother or anybody can call and say, no, I am not happy with that decision. And ask a second opinion, because that is how things work. Two, there are people who think a magistrate is a demigod.
Yes.
There are institutions like the Judicial Service Commission where this can be. Some of these things don't need money.
Yes.
It is just a question of critical thinking.
Information
people
also.
Who think the RDC is
It's
beyond
good.
reproach.
Yes.
And RDC is not even anchored in the public service.
Thank you, Doctor, for your insights on the program. Yes, Tim, your concluding remarks.
I think for me really is to challenge all of us that amidst the confusion, there's an opportunity to contribute to the dispensation of this country, and to call on those that are who have been charged with the responsibility to execute it in the best way possible. For the citizens, we have a responsibility to contribute to how we are governed, to contribute to speaking out, but also more importantly, to contribute in ensuring that we can continuously participate in these processes. As mentioned, I think the more we participate, the more we engage, the better the systems, the better the structures, the engagement, but also the better the society gets. So all of us have a responsibility, and for this show, I think being a parliament-focused show, I think that members of parliament, or us as citizens, a responsibility to represent our views, and that we must hold them to account. But ultimately, I think that we have to strengthen citizens' agency, which is very important, so that we're able to hold the leadership accountable, but also to contribute meaningfully to these processes of governance. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective, Timothy. Charity, your concluding remarks on the program.
So I've enjoyed Dr. Tolit, and I wanted to keep hearing a bit of, the connection of the dots, because the more we talk about these things, the better. And if we use his language, which the public understands, it is easier. You see, for us in communication, we have what we call communicate to my grandmother. Use ordinary language. That's why many times I avoid using gigantic diction. Now, Dr. Tolit has called us to the highest place. What do we remember about the 2024 Parliament? Number one, we had Mpuga, who had the issues of Yaria te Yaria. That has never been concluded. We saw a parliament where we had commissioners who gave themselves 500 million, and the president said, even if they are from NRM, I want accountability. It has not happened. We have had a parliament where there was Mabati, and then sanctions came, and we saw what happened with the sanctions story. The president said, if it is true that there are houses in London which belong to some people, he wrote letters, letter 1, letter 2. We said, now it's going to happen. Nothing happened. We have a parliament where the ayes are always the nays, and the nays are the ayes in the eyes of the speaker. Okay? We have a parliament that when it got to rationalization of the UCDA, we had conflict, people being beaten, others fighting, others standing, and then at the end of the day, the citizen was at a loss. We have a parliament that was asked to go back and give Rocco construction money, which money we have not seen come to fruition for the citizen. So what am I saying, my dear brother Isaac? I am saying that the citizens have had a raw deal from their institution called the Parliament in 2024. And that going forward, the hope we have is that there is an election coming in 2026. And in that election, whereas there may not be a room for us to change certain things, that the NRM will still be the domineering party, it will have a lot of money, it will influence, it will do it, we can coalesce around people with ideas that will push Ugandans from where we are to a better society. Our Vision 2040 is entitled Moving from a Peasant Society to a Modern Age Society. Can we achieve it? Only by electing men and women who have a solid spine.
That's a challenge for all of us. Thank you, Charity, for your viewpoints on the program. Professor Insam, what can you tell the citizen?
If I can follow up on where she finished. Today our topic was about Parliament and its role, or ways it can act, especially in its role of oversight. Now, here when we're talking about Parliament, we're talking about a collective institution. Collective. People acting collectively. I hope I'm understood.
Yeah.
Not as individuals. Now, how can they act collectively when they are not nationalists? If people don't have a sense of nationhood, and they go to Parliament, and they don't have that collective attitude and values and norms to act, to achieve a certain national goal, it shall not go very far. I think, I don't know how many of us are economists here, but I think the Nobel Prize winner of Nobel Economic Prize winner, 1993, I think Douglas North, he actually talked about the role of institutions in development. And by institutions, he didn't mean mainly these organizations we have as parliament, as judiciary, as whatever. He actually meant institutions as norms of development. So if we're talking about norms of governance, and we don't have a critical a critical individual members of parliament that have that goal and that sense, a sense of nationhood, and they are aiming at promoting nationhood, they will go there and act according to their instinct of survival. And therefore, when, for example, the NRM, which is now the dominant party, when anybody, I think it is Dr. Tolit who said that there is a high turnover, more than 60%, others even claim it is 80%. Now, if somebody is aiming at returning to parliament, he will toe the line. He will not stand, or she will not stand and be a stateswoman or statesman. He will just a boy politician who is looking at his or her survival, because he is not anchored in a high sense of nationhood. He doesn't mind even if people steal funds, they can steal, they don't, those are not my funds. And the citizens, I think some of you talked about citizens. I will conclude with this one, which we have been discussing here. You remember when the Speaker of Parliament and Honorable Chinyamatama went to Gwengo. Was it Gwengo district?
Yes.
Yes?
And said she has been
And told the
stealing.
public that stealing public funds, the government of Uganda funds, and sharing some crumbs with you is the norm of the day, and it is what we should do. And they were cheered by citizens. What do you expect now the politicians also to behave? You see, the citizens there should have said, wait a minute, our leaders, how can you say that stealing public funds is normal? Instead, they cheered them. Now, this politician now will also follow what the citizens want. And what do they want? Steal public funds. Why is this happening to our politicians, the political class, and the citizens? Both of us are lacking a sense of nationhood. If they had a sense of nationhood, they would stand their ground. You cannot stand your ground if you don't have a sense of nationhood. The only sense that I can see predominant in Uganda, prevailing in Uganda, is a high sense of individual survival. That is what drives political actions. That's what drives citizens' actions, because we lack a sense of nationhood. But what are we doing? Nothing. Last night I was asking the Minister of National Guidance that do you have a national guidance agenda? What is a national guidance agenda? Some agenda that would prepare us into that high sense of nationhood. Without it,
I'm interested in knowing what his reply was.
no, he said we don't have it.
He said yes.
No, he said we don't have it. We are trying to write a policy.
Thank you, Professor, for your insights on the program.
Yes.
Once again, I must appreciate you, Dr. Tolit, Timothy Chimonges, Charita Hindisiwe, and Professor Ndebesa, for your able participation and patriotic guidance to the citizenry on today's edition of Focus on Parliament. Many thanks to our esteemed viewers. Many thanks to the production department for keeping us live on air. Please, our dear viewers, engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Facebook. You can watch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.